In the twilight of a career that has spanned more than 7 remarkable decades, Sir Cliff Richard stands as a singular pillar of the British music industry. At 85 years old, an age where most have long since retreated into the quiet comfort of their memories, the man once known as the British Elvis is choosing to look back with a startling and newfound honesty. While his life has been a whirlwind of gold records, sold-out stadiums, and a record-breaking string of hits that touched every decade from the 1950s to the 2010s, there is one chapter of his story that has remained largely misunderstood by the public. It is the story of a deep, complicated, and intensely spiritual connection with a man who walked a parallel but very different path, the quiet Beatle, George Harrison. For years, the world saw them as symbols of two different musical movements. Cliff was the clean-cut, enduring icon of pop and rock and roll, while George was the introspective architect of the most influential band in history. Yet, behind the velvet curtains of fame and away from the flashbulbs of the paparazzi, these two legends shared a bond rooted in a mutual search for something far more permanent than a place on the charts. Today, Cliff Richard is finally opening up about the truth of that friendship, a relationship that defied the expectations of their fans and even the boundaries of their respective faiths. This is not just a story of two musicians who met at the height of the British invasion. It is an exploration of two souls who navigated the same road of global stardom while seeking the same destination: peace, love, and truth. While Cliff found his grounding in a profound conversion to Christianity in the mid-1960s, George was drawn toward the ancient wisdom of Eastern philosophy and meditation. Despite these diverging paths, Cliff reveals that their conversations were some of the most profound of his life, filled with a respect and curiosity that transcended religious dogma. As we delve into this narrative, we see a side of Sir Cliff Richard that we have rarely glimpsed before. He speaks with a voice that trembles slightly with the weight of 85 years of gratitude, reflecting on a man who wasn't just an icon, but a gentle soul trying to make sense of existence. In his reflections, Cliff admits to a quiet envy of Harrison's courage. The courage to step away from the blinding light of the stage, to find himself in the silence of a garden. Through Cliff's eyes, we discover that George Harrison reminded us all that music should come from the soul rather than the charts. This is the definitive account of a friendship that stands as a testament to the shared spirit of two men who sought harmony, not just in their songs, but in their very souls. The story of Sir Cliff Richard begins far from the grey skies of post-war England, in a world characterized by the vibrant colors and heat of Lucknow, India. Born Harry Roger Webb on October 14, 1940, he spent the earliest years of his life in a setting that was worlds away from the British pop scene he would eventually come to dominate. When Indian independence was declared in 1948, his family made the life-changing decision to move back to the United Kingdom, where the young boy experienced the harsh realities and struggles of a country still rebuilding itself after the devastation of World War II. These formative years, spent in modest surroundings in Cheshunt, Hertfordshire, instilled in him a resilience that would define his record-breaking career. It was during this time that he discovered the sounds that would change the trajectory of his life forever. He developed a deep and abiding love for American rock and roll, finding himself particularly drawn to the raw energy and magnetism of Elvis Presley and the wild, uninhibited performances of Little Richard. This passion was more than just a teenage hobby. It was the spark that transformed an ordinary boy from a modest family into one of the United Kingdom's greatest musical icons. By the late 1950s, while the four members of the Beatles were still finding their footing and their sound, Cliff was already leading a cultural revolution. He was the vessel through which rock and roll was brought to British audiences, acting as the bridge between American influence and British sensibility. The turning point came in 1958, when Cliff Richard burst onto the music scene with his debut single, Move It. This track was not just a hit. It is now widely considered by music historians to be the first authentic British rock and roll song. With its raw guitar riffs and driving, energetic rhythm, Move It established Cliff as the UK's definitive answer to Elvis Presley. Alongside his band The Drifters, who would soon be renamed The Shadows, he became a household name, defining a brand new musical era for a generation of youth, hungry for their own identity. The seamless blend of Cliff's smooth, versatile vocals and the instrumental brilliance of the Shadows created a distinctive sound that would go on to dominate the charts for years to come. Throughout the early 1960s, the partnership of Cliff and the Shadows released a staggering string of hits, including Living Doll, Travel in Light, Please Don't Tease, and The Young Ones. These songs did more than just sell records. They captured the very spirit of 1960s youth culture and cemented Cliff's status as the ultimate teen idol. Even as the mid-1960s brought the monumental British invasion and the global rise of the Beatles, Cliff Richard managed to achieve something that many of his contemporaries could not. He remained relevant. Unlike others who faded into obscurity as musical trends evolved, Cliff adapted. His clean-cut image and versatile voice allowed him to shift effortlessly from pure rock and roll to pop ballads and even gospel music, ensuring that his career would not be a mere moment in time, but a legacy built on endurance. The relationship between Cliff Richard and George Harrison did not begin with the flash of cameras or the roar of a stadium audience, but rather in a moment of quiet humility that set the tone for their future connection. By the early 1960s, Cliff was already an established superstar, a veteran of the stage who had paved the way for the groups that would soon follow. The Beatles, meanwhile, were still in the midst of their climb to global fame, working their way through the clubs and theaters of the North. Despite their different positions in the industry at that time, there was an underlying current of mutual admiration that transcended the competitive nature of the charts. Cliff recalls their very first meeting with a vividness that has not dimmed over the decades, admitting that the encounter was far from glamorous. It took place backstage during a show in Liverpool, the home turf of the Fab Four. Even then, Cliff was struck by the demeanor of the young man who would become known as the Quiet Beatle. He remembers thinking how incredibly shy George appeared to be. Harrison was not a man of many words in those early days, often staying in the background while the more boisterous personalities of the band took center stage. Yet, Cliff observed that when George did smile, there was an unmistakable sense of intelligence and depth behind his eyes, suggesting a mind that was constantly observing and processing the world around him. This initial meeting revealed a commonality that both men shared, a profound sense of professionalism and a deep-seated humility. While Cliff had become the definitive British rock star, he maintained a reputation for being a consummate professional, always punctual, always prepared, and always respectful to everyone he encountered. George, in turn, admired Cliff for these very qualities, recognizing the discipline it took to sustain a career in an industry that was often chaotic and unpredictable. For Cliff, the admiration was centered on George's burgeoning musicianship and his refusal to let the burgeoning mania of Beatlemania erode his grounded nature. As the years progressed, their friendship developed slowly and organically, rooted not in the hollow trappings of fame, but in a shared introspection. They were two individuals who, despite being surrounded by millions of screaming fans, often felt like outsiders looking in on the spectacle of their own lives. This shared feeling created a safe space where they could speak honestly about the pressures of being cultural icons. Their bond was built on a foundation of mutual respect for the craft of music and an unspoken understanding that there was something more to life than the pursuit of the next #1 hit. It was during these early, quieter moments that the seeds were sown for the deep spiritual dialogues that would define their relationship in the years to follow. As the cultural landscape of the 1960s shifted, the personal lives of Cliff Richard and George Harrison took significant, life-altering turns that would define their public images and private convictions for decades to come. For Cliff, the mid-1960s marked a profound spiritual awakening. His conversion to Christianity in 1966 was not a fleeting phase. It became the moral compass that reshaped his entire career and personal life. He began to balance his pop stardom with his faith, releasing gospel albums and maintaining a clean-cut, wholesome persona that stood in stark contrast to the growing rebellion of the era. While many expected his career to falter under the weight of such a traditional image, his faith actually grounded him, earning him a level of respect that extended far beyond the music industry. While Cliff was finding his foundation in the church, George Harrison was embarking on a journey toward the East. Through the Beatles' massive influence, George became a cultural pioneer of a different sort, exploring Eastern philosophy, meditation, and Hinduism. Despite these seemingly opposite directions, one rooted in traditional Western Christianity and the other in ancient Eastern mysticism, the two men found themselves closer than ever in their private thoughts. Cliff recalls that they often discussed the nature of God and the meaning of existence, approaching the conversation from their different perspectives, but always seeking a shared destination: peace, love, and truth. Cliff shares that George once told him that all paths lead to the same place if a person's heart is right. This sentiment became a cornerstone of their bond, as they engaged in profound conversations that Cliff describes as some of the most meaningful of his life. There was never a sense of debate or a need to prove one faith superior to the other. Instead, their interactions were characterized by a deep, quiet respect and an insatiable curiosity about the universe. Cliff often found himself defending George's spiritual explorations to a public that didn't always understand him. While others viewed George as eccentric, or as if he were running away from his fame, Cliff saw a man who was simply searching for inner peace in a world that never stopped shouting his name. This mutual spiritual hunger even manifested in their creative lives. Cliff recalls one vivid evening when George played the sitar for a small, intimate group. Watching George lose himself in the instrument, Cliff realized that for Harrison, music was never just about a performance or a chart position. It was a raw expression of emotion, and something far more real and deep. This moment profoundly changed the way Cliff thought about his own craft. Inspired by George's authenticity, Cliff began to record songs that carried more personal and spiritual weight, realizing that the soul of a song was more important than its commercial viability. Even as they moved through different decades and musical styles, the truth they both sought remained the invisible thread that kept their friendship enduring and quiet. The career of Sir Cliff Richard is a masterclass in the art of longevity, a feat that few in the history of global entertainment can claim to match. While the landscape of popular music shifted violently from the rock and roll of the 50s to the synth pop of the 80s and the digital age of the 2000s, Cliff remained a permanent fixture. He achieved the staggering milestone of being the only artist to secure a top 5 hit in every decade from the 1950s to the 2010s. Yet, this incredible endurance came with a hidden cost: the weight of living under a constant, unwavering spotlight for more than 60 years. Cliff reflects on how his wholesome, optimistic persona was not just a brand, but a shield that allowed him to navigate an industry often defined by scandal and excess. As he looks back from the vantage point of 85 years, Cliff speaks with striking honesty about the internal struggle of maintaining such a public existence. He notes that achieving a sense of inner peace is a rare and difficult task when the world refuses to stop shouting your name. While Cliff found his strength in his deep Christian faith and his dedication to his fans, he admits that he often looked at George Harrison's life with a sense of admiration that bordered on envy. George possessed a specific kind of courage that Cliff felt he lacked: the courage to walk away from the fame that had defined them both. George Harrison famously distanced himself from the madness of the industry, finding solace in the quietude of his garden and the simplicity of playing his guitar for himself rather than an audience. Cliff reflects on how George had the strength to say he had seen and done enough, effectively disappearing into a private life that was authentically his own. In contrast, Cliff admits that his own love for performing and the thrill of the stage was perhaps too strong for him to ever truly step back in the same way. This realization is both inspiring and haunting for him, serving as a reminder of how fame can simultaneously elevate an artist to the heavens and imprison them in a golden cage of public expectation. Despite the differences in how they handled their status, Cliff never felt that George was running away from his talent. Instead, he understood that Harrison was running towards something more substantial, an inner harmony that the charts could never provide. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, even as Cliff experienced a remarkable resurgence with hits like Devil Woman and We Don't Talk Anymore, he carried George's example of humility in his heart. He remained a deeply private man, never marrying and choosing to focus on his faith and friendships, perhaps influenced by the quiet Beatles' insistence on protecting the sanctity of the soul against the intrusions of the modern world. As the decades marched forward, the bond between Cliff Richard and George Harrison remained a quiet constant, even as their public lives continued to flourish in disparate directions. Throughout the latter part of the 20th century, Cliff solidified his status as a permanent fixture of the British musical landscape, while George moved deeper into his solo career and spiritual devotion. Despite the infrequency of their meetings, the impact George had on Cliff's perspective toward his own artistry was lasting. Cliff often looked to George as a man who stayed true to his own spirit, regardless of the immense cultural pressure to conform to the expectations of being a global icon. This influence became increasingly visible in Cliff's later work. Entering the 21st century, he continued to tour and record with an energy that seemed to defy time. His 2018 album, Rise Up, his first collection of original material in nearly 14 years, marked a triumphant return to form, with critics and fans alike praising its uplifting and dynamic sound. The album's title served as a reflection of his own unyielding spirit, yet the emotional depth of his newer recordings echoed the soulfulness he had long admired in George's music. Cliff's ability to reinvent himself while staying rooted in the sincerity he shared with Harrison allowed him to maintain his position in the top 10 charts more than 60 years after his debut. The news of George Harrison's untimely death in 2001 struck Cliff with a profound sense of loss that was deeper than he had anticipated. Though they were not constant companions, George's presence in Cliff's life represented a shared understanding of the burdens and blessings of fame. In the years following, Cliff often reflected on George's legacy of peace and love, qualities he felt were increasingly missing from the modern, chart-driven music industry. He viewed Harrison as a reminder that music should always be an expression of the soul, a philosophy Cliff attempted to carry forward into his own festive releases and retrospective projects, such as Christmas with Cliff in 2022. Now, at 85, Cliff Richard views his connection to the quiet Beatle not just as a footnote in history, but as a guiding light for his twilight years. He speaks of George with a trembling gratitude, thankful for the rare connection they shared as two very different souls walking the same road. For Cliff, the memory of George is not that of the global icon or the revolutionary musician, but of the gentle man who, like himself, was simply trying to make sense of a complicated life. This enduring harmony serves as a testament to a friendship that transcended the noise of the world, proving that even in the height of stardom, true connection is found in the search for truth. As Sir Cliff Richard reaches the milestone of 85 years, his journey remains an extraordinary testament to the power of resilience and the enduring nature of the human spirit. His recent disclosure regarding a successful battle with early-stage prostate cancer underscores a vulnerability he has met with the same quiet strength he has applied to his 7-decade career. Even now, he refuses to let time dictate his pace, announcing national tours for 2025 and 2026, driven by a passion for performance that remains as vibrant as it was in 1958. Yet, it is his reflection on George Harrison that perhaps provides the most profound window into the man behind the knighthood. In George, Cliff found a mirror to his own soul, a fellow traveler who understood that the noise of the world is temporary, but the search for internal harmony is eternal. Their friendship proves that even when paths diverge into different faiths and philosophies, the destination of peace and truth remains the same. Cliff's willingness to speak of his admiration for Harrison's humility and his envy of George's courage to step away reminds us that every icon is, at heart, a person seeking meaning beyond the spotlight. Sir Cliff Richard continues to celebrate a lifetime of music and memories, a legacy built not just on record-breaking numbers, but on authentic connections that transcend the industry. His story is a powerful reminder for the modern age that while the charts may fade, a soul that sings from a place of truth will resonate forever. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the lives of two of Britain's most cherished legends. If you found this exploration of Sir Cliff Richard and George Harrison's hidden bond moving, please consider subscribing to Memories of the Stars. Don't forget to like this video and share your own favorite memories of Sir Cliff or the Quiet Beetle in the comments below. We'll see you in the next chapter of Music History.